I first saw Jake at the gym. I was 64, married for over 40 years to a man who had long ceased to be my romantic partner. My husband, Richard, was a good man in many ways, but our marriage had dwindled into a routine of cordial indifference. We were like two parallel lines, existing side by side, but never really connecting. I still remember that day at the gym clearly. The way Jake moved with an effortless grace, his youthful energy a sharp contrast to my own weariness. Jake was 22, young and vigorous, and his presence felt almost magnetic. He had an intensity in his eyes, a fire that was impossible to ignore. I found myself drawn to him in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I'd catch myself watching him from across the room, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt. It was wrong, but it was also thrilling. I was determined to get his attention. The first time I approached him, it was casual, a simple comment about how well he was lifting weights. But it was the way I said it, the light touch on his arm, that was meant to convey more than mere friendliness. Jake was polite, smiling as he replied, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something I took as curiosity or perhaps even interest. Over the next few weeks, I became more deliberate. I'd change into workout clothes that accentuated my figure, subtle but revealing enough to be provocative. I'd often find reasons to be near him, striking up conversations and gently touching his arm or shoulder during our exchanges. I'd watch his reaction closely, noticing the way he'd stiffen or try to maintain his composure. It was a game, one I was both excited and apprehensive about. Despite my efforts, Jake was elusive. He was always polite, always engaging, but never crossing the line. He would laugh at my jokes, but there was a noticeable distance that kept me guessing. His responses were measured, never encouraging, yet not dismissive. It was as though he was playing a game of restraint, and the more he held back, the more I wanted to push the boundaries. I'd find myself daydreaming about him, imagining scenarios where he'd finally give in. I started to crave our encounters, looking forward to seeing him at the gym, waiting for that brief but charged interaction. Each day, my anticipation grew, fueling my desire. One day, after an intense workout, I decided to take a different approach. I had just finished my session and was wiping off sweat when Jake approached. I was wearing a form-fitting tank top and shorts, the material clinging to me in a way I hoped would catch his eye. I could see him glancing at me as he approached, a smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Jake," I said, trying to sound casual but feeling the undercurrent of tension between us. "You've been working hard. How about a smoothie after this?" He looked at me with that same unreadable expression, but I saw a spark of something in his eyes. "Sure, that sounds good," he replied, his voice steady. We went to the smoothie bar together, and the conversation was light, filled with the usual banter. But I could sense a shift. There was an edge to his responses, a slight change in his demeanor. I decided to test the waters further. As we stood close to each other, I let my hand brush against his, my fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't pull away, but his gaze was fixed on the counter, his face a mask of concentration. The real breakthrough came a few days later. I had invited Jake to my house for dinner under the pretense of getting to know him better. Richard was away on one of his frequent business trips, leaving me alone to plan an evening that I hoped would be both memorable and revealing. I spent hours preparing the meal, dressing in a soft, elegant dress that I knew would highlight my curves. When Jake arrived, he looked surprised but pleased. We sat down to a sumptuous dinner, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and a hint of something more. The conversation flowed easily, but I noticed how often Jake's gaze would wander over me, lingering on my dress and the way it accentuated my figure. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I had arranged it to be cozy and intimate, with soft lighting and comfortable seating. I poured us both glasses of wine, and we settled on the couch. I could feel the tension building between us, a palpable energy that crackled with every touch. As the evening wore on, I found myself inching closer to Jake. Our conversation became more personal, more intense, and I could see his restraint starting to falter. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for his wine glass, and I took that as a sign. I leaned in slightly, my shoulder touching his. I could feel his breath quicken, and I knew he was feeling the same electric current that I was. I allowed my hand to rest lightly on his thigh, my fingers gently caressing the fabric of his jeans. Jake's breathing grew more ragged, and he looked at me with a mix of desire and hesitation. Finally, I decided to take the plunge. I turned to him, my eyes locked onto his, and slowly leaned in. Our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and filled with urgency. It was as though all the pent-up longing and anticipation had been channeled into that one kiss. Jake responded with equal fervor, his hands cupping my face as he deepened the kiss. When we finally pulled away, both breathless, I saw the look of satisfaction in Jake's eyes. It was clear that he was as eager as I was to explore what was unfolding between us. I could sense his resolve crumbling, replaced by a powerful desire that matched my own. The following weeks were a whirlwind of passion and secrecy. Each encounter with Jake was charged with excitement and a sense of danger. We continued to meet at my house, each time with a growing sense of intimacy and connection. The physical contact became more frequent and more intense. We'd share lingering kisses, touch each other with increasing boldness, and find ways to be alone together whenever possible. Our interactions at the gym took on a new dynamic. Each touch, each glance was laden with meaning, a reminder of the secret we were keeping. The thrill of our affair was intoxicating, and the fact that it was hidden from Richard only added to the excitement. Jake played his part with enthusiasm, his youthful energy contrasting with my more experienced approach. He was a perfect combination of eagerness and restraint, and it drove me wild. One memorable night, Jake stayed over at my house. We had spent the evening dining and talking, our conversation becoming increasingly intimate. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where the mood was relaxed and the lighting soft. Jake's hand brushed against mine, and I felt a familiar thrill run through me. We sat close on the couch, our bodies almost touching. I could sense his anticipation, the way he seemed to be waiting for me to make the next move. I let my fingers lightly trace his arm, enjoying the way his muscles tensed under my touch. As the night wore on, our kisses grew more passionate. I pulled him closer, our bodies pressed together, and we explored each other with a mix of urgency and tenderness. We ended up in my bedroom, where the intimacy reached its peak. The physical connection was exhilarating, and each touch seemed to deepen our bond. Despite the intense connection we shared, the affair was not without its complications. There were moments of guilt and doubt, moments when I questioned the morality of what we were doing. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the powerful emotions that Jake stirred in me. The secrecy of our relationship only heightened the tension. I had to be constantly vigilant, ensuring that Richard never suspected anything. There were nights when I would lie awake, my mind racing with thoughts of Jake and the thrilling, dangerous affair we were involved in. I also noticed Jackie becoming more assertive, more confident in his desires. He would often tease me, his playful touches and comments driving me to the edge. It was clear that he enjoyed the power he had over me, and it added an exciting layer to our relationship. One evening, Jake came over after a particularly stressful day at the gym. He was agitated, his usual composure replaced by a sense of urgency. We quickly fell into each other's arms, our kisses fierce and desperate. It was clear that the tension had built to a breaking point, and the release was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Our bodies moved together with a fervor that matched the intensity of our emotions. The passion we shared was both physical and emotional, a culmination of all the longing and anticipation that had built up over weeks of secret meetings. Afterward, we lay together, the room filled with the soft sounds of our breathing. Jake looked at me with a mixture of satisfaction and longing. "I never knew it could be like this," he said softly. I smiled, my heart full. Neither did I. but it's been incredible. As the affair continued, I found myself increasingly torn between the excitement of my relationship with Jake and the reality of my marriage. Richard remained oblivious to the secret life I was leading, and I struggled with the conflicting emotions that came with living a double life. Each encounter with Jake was a whirlwind of passion and discovery, yet the guilt of deceiving Richard weighed heavily on me. Our meetings became more frequent, each one charged with the same intensity that had initially drawn us together. We would steal moments of intimacy wherever we could, sometimes at my house, other times in secluded spots that offered us a temporary escape from the world. The thrill of our clandestine affair never waned, and Jake's youthful exuberance contrasted sharply with the stagnant routine of my married life. Jake's assertiveness grew, as did his emotional investment. He was no longer just the eager lover. He was becoming someone I deeply cared about. Our conversations grew more intimate, touching on dreams, fears, and the complexities of our lives. He started to question the future, asking me about what I wanted, not just in our relationship, but in my life overall. These conversations were both exhilarating and terrifying. Jake's probing questions made me reflect on the choices I had made and the life I was living. One evening, after a particularly emotional conversation, Jake took my hand and led me to a quiet, secluded spot in the garden. The soft moonlight bathed us in a gentle glow, and I felt a profound sense of connection as we stood together. The emotional depth of our relationship was becoming clearer, and the lines between physical attraction and genuine affection were blurring. Jake's fingers traced the lines of my face as he gazed at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "What are we doing, Marie?" he asked softly. "I know this is intense, and I can see how much it means to you. But where is this going? What do you want?" His question hit me hard. I had been so consumed by the excitement and the secrecy that I hadn't fully considered the long-term implications of our affair. I felt a wave of vulnerability as I realized that Jake was not just a fleeting distraction, but someone who had become a significant part of my life. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "I never imagined it would get to this point. I was just looking for something different, something that made me feel alive again. But now, I have to think about what this means for both of us." As the days went by, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with the implications of our affair. Jake's question echoed in my mind, and I knew I had to confront the reality of my situation. Richard's return from his business trip added to my anxiety. I had to maintain the facade of a happy wife, even as I was torn by my secret life. One night, Richard came home earlier than expected. I was in the midst of a heated conversation with Jake over the phone when Richard walked in. I quickly ended the call, my heart racing as I faced him. Richard looked at me with curiosity, sensing something was amiss but unable to pinpoint what it was. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I forced a smile, trying to appear nonchalant. "Yes, just had a long day. I was talking to a friend." Richard seemed satisfied with my answer, though I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. As I watched him go about his evening routine, I felt a pang of guilt and confusion. The life I had built with Richard was one of stability and familiarity, but it was also one of unfulfilled dreams and unspoken regrets. Jake had brought a whirlwind of passion into my life, but at what cost? Jake and I continued to see each other, but the emotional weight of our affair became harder to bear. The thrill of secrecy and the joy of our encounters were tempered by the growing realization that we needed to address the future of our relationship. We had reached a crossroads where we had to decide whether to continue living in this heightened state of emotional turmoil or to confront the reality of our situation. One afternoon, we met at a secluded park, a favorite spot of ours for its tranquility and privacy. Jake was unusually quiet as we sat together on a bench, his hand clasped in mine. I could sense the seriousness in his demeanor, and it mirrored my own inner turmoil. "Marie," he began, his voice serious, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we want and what this means. I care about you deeply, but I can't keep going like this. It's tearing me apart, and I know it's affecting you too." I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "I know," I said softly. "I've been thinking about it too. I never imagined that things would get so complicated. I care about you so much, but I'm also living a life that's not easy to walk away from." Jake took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. "I want to be with you, Marie. I want us to have a future together, but we need to figure out how to make that happen. It's not fair to either of us to keep living in this limbo." The decision was not an easy one. I had to confront the reality of my marriage and make a choice about my future. Richard was a good man, but our marriage had lost its spark long ago. Jake offered a new beginning, a chance to rediscover passion and connection. But leaving Richard was not something I could do lightly. After many sleepless nights and heartfelt conversations with Jake, I made the difficult decision to end my marriage. It was a painful and emotional process, filled with moments of doubt and regret. Richard was devastated, but he understood that our marriage had reached its end. Jake and I began a new chapter, building our relationship on a foundation of honesty and shared experiences. The transition was challenging, but we faced it together. The affair that had started as a secret indulgence became the basis for a new beginning, one that was filled with both promise and uncertainty. In the end, our relationship was a testament to the power of passion and the complexity of human connections. It was a journey of self-discovery and transformation, one that brought both joy and heartache. As we moved forward, we embraced the lessons learned and the love we had found in each other.